And it's recording. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Well, as of right now, I don't believe we have any members of the Diana is here, but it will not let her unmute. I think, gosh, how do we do that, Melissa? We've had this battle before, haven't we?
Whoops, sorry, I was muted. I will click on ask to unmute. Yes, I think that might be an issue with the phone callers. Oh, there we go.
Hi, it let me
Hey, Deanna.
unmute. It was *6. Hi all.
*6, that's right. I remember learning this. All right. Well, Diana, thank you for joining us. Do you want to go ahead and call the meeting to order as committee chair?
Do I just say I'm calling the meeting first?
That's it. That counts, I think. So this is a bit of a unique meeting because we've been meeting as a strategic planning work group, which a number of folks here have been to one or more of those meetings. Diana, I believe you actually were at the first one, if I recall correctly, I think.
Yes.
Yes, awesome. And so we wanted to actually have a meeting jointly with the Policy Rules and Research Committee. I'm hoping Zan is able to join. We had a few folks RSVP, they would join us. So if they pop on, that'll be great. So what I wanted to do is to essentially share what work the work group has done with members of the committee, but also talk about where we've arrived. Now this is essentially the fourth meeting of that strategic planning work group, and essentially present to you what we've developed as a result of those conversations and some additional work that we've done internally with Youth Development Division staff. Given that just about everybody here was at the last work group meeting, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time reviewing because you are hopefully somewhat familiar with what we've done. So I'm going to put my slides up and I'm going to zoom through, and essentially what I'm going to share today is the latest iteration of a proposed structure for our strategic plan, and hoping to have some discussion about what we've got, what we'll put before you, and get your feedback as a work group, and hopefully also members of the committee on where we are with this. I'm going to share my screen. For some reason, I've been on Teams all day and now I can't remember how to share my screen in Zoom.
It should be lit up green at the bottom, Cord.
Oh, it's disabled. Do you mind enabling my sharing, please?
Of course. There we go. It's like we've never done this before.
I know. Well,
Thanks for your patience, everyone.
I've shared my screen several times today, but the button's in a totally different place, so I'm disoriented.
It should be green now, available.
Here we go. All right. All right, I believe everyone should be able to see this slideshow now. Does everybody have the slide deck? No?
No, we don't see it.
What did I do wrong? We'll try this again. I'm sorry. Now?
Yes, great.
Okay. Yep. All right. I'm not going to talk about the recap because most of you have participated in some way, but just to say that since the last work group meeting, I took the ideas around strategic plan structure as well as the all the feedback that we got in the Jamboard, brought that. We actually had a staff meeting last week with our team where we did essentially the same activity with a new iteration and got staff to provide feedback on what we had, and then spent some more time working on this. So what I'm going to share today is the result of both the feedback in the last strategic plan work group meeting and conversation with the YDD team about this. One of the things that I was going to share a little more about for the committee members, but just that a lot of what we've developed is trying to find a way to use some of the good stuff that was in our previous strategic plan. You had looked at our 3 overarching goals and how those might be used, some of the language also that we had around our approaches to grant making and policy. As folks saw last time, a lot of this stuff found a way into some of the language that we shared. Talked about some of the challenges with that previous structure, but I'm just going to talk about what we've tried to do with what I'm going to show today, which is develop something that takes the best ideas from our 2021 plan, goals, and approaches, but makes something that's a little easier to follow, that actually gives us a framework to hang our strategic plan on. Make sure that when we're identifying the action steps we take, we also link it to outcomes. I mean, that was, I think, an observation in one of the work group meetings, that like there's a disconnect between all the things we sought to do and what results and impact we sought to see. And then also we need something that we can use to incorporate. We have a whole lot of ideas that were generated in our retreat with staff and council back in the fall. And ultimately all that stuff needs to filter into the plan that we develop in some way. So essentially, this is, roughly speaking, the structure that we've arrived at now. I'll talk about what all this stuff means, but I wanted to give you this zoomed out look at it just before we get into the details. So essentially, the plan, like our previous plan, has some guiding elements, the mission, vision, and in this case, the values that we had in the previous plan are ultimately manifesting in lots of ways within other parts here. But we're actually going to take the Youth Development Oregon Equity Statement, which is something that's been developed by our council's equity committee, and we'll actually use that as a way of representing values and beliefs in the next plan. So mission, vision, and equity statement will be guiding elements. And then instead of those what were the 3 overarching goals, we've flipped things around to we're calling 3 imperatives. Those are to prioritize prevention, create connection, and embed equity. And I will talk in a minute about what each of those means and how those categories will be used in the plan. For each of those things, so for example, around prevention work, there's going to be different levels that we are working at, what we're calling levels of impact. So that's the individual, those are the youth and the families that our programs serve, as well as youth who are participants in the council or otherwise, those that we engage with in our work as a division. Program level is really our grantees, but also partner organizations of those organizations, our applicants, perhaps too. There's a community level of work that we do, and that's everything from work that might be happening in a neighborhood where maybe one or more of our grantees is operating, to an entire region where we're convening collaboratives of our re-engagement and workforce programs. And then there's system level work, which is really what we're doing that has a statewide or even national level of impact. So that's everything from our work with other state agencies and the different policy tables that YDC or YDD may be at. It also includes things like the JJDPA, Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act, the federal laws that govern our prevention work, and how we interact with national stakeholders around our justice and prevention work. Also national work around re-engagement. So all the ways that we are trying to affect system level change. And each of these levels, there are different sorts of strategies and actions that we might carry out in the plan in order to try to affect the change we seek. Strategy here is just a set of actions. So it's going to have a measurable outcome. So for every strategy that we develop, we need to know what we will use to measure the success of that strategy. And if it's not measurable, then maybe it's something other than a strategy. The actions are the specific steps that we take to move a strategy forward. So there might be 2, 3, 4 or more things that we will do as part of a strategy. Those are really outputs. So the accomplishment of the thing is essentially the measure of success for an action. And then the metric that we determine for a strategy is going to be the outcome that indicates success. So this is really essentially, I mean, you could say 5 tiers. It's really 4. The imperative is the highest organizing level, and then levels of impact under each imperative. And then for each level of impact, there will be strategies and actions that attempt to move the dial. So this is just the overview of the structure. I'll pause now and see if anybody has any comments or reactions to this.
Generally, I like the visual and I like the terms you've used and described because I think it summarizes conversations we've had well in a comprehensible manner.
Great. Thanks, Bethany. If you've seen all the meetings, so you can hold me accountable if I've gotten too far off track, but I've really tried to honor the input that folks have given as much as possible. If everyone's okay with it, I will jump ahead now to just talk. I'm going to skip this slide. It's a lot of stuff. I'm going to talk about what the 3 imperatives are. There's been some discussion about these in the previous meeting, but I wanted to share where we're at in terms of what these mean. So at a high level, this is meant to describe the objectives of our work. Prevention is really about both the prevention of youth crime and violence and also of disconnection and some of the other negative impacts on young people that we seek to address. Prioritize is really not meant to say prevention is the most important thing. This isn't meant to be hierarchical. Staff, we've had discussions about rearranging this order, and I think maybe down the road we can, but prioritize just means prevention is the first thing you do. If we can't prevent things, then we have other ways of trying to do our work. But it's really just saying, first and foremost, we want to keep young people safe. We want to keep them out of trouble. We want them to stay connected. And so we prioritize prevention in order to disrupt youth disconnection, crime and violence, want to address root causes and foster a culture of safety, belonging, and hope. Creating connection. I actually think maybe in the last meeting of the work group, this wasn't really fleshed out. We had 2 of these 3 imperatives, and we really wanted a place where we spoke to our work, particularly around re-engagement, but also just the fact that we're both engaging and re-engaging youth, and a lot of what we're doing is providing young people with opportunities to reconnect, to make change, to really have a second chance in a lot of ways, whether it's educational re-engagement, whether it's transition or reentry from the justice system, recovery schools, or recovery from substance use disorder, which have been the focus of some grants, even restorative justice. So all those things are sort of addressed here in some way. Really, it's about the opportunity for young people to come back, to engage, to re-engage with learning and build skills in spaces that are welcoming, where they have positive relationships with adults, and there are strength-based approaches to making positive change in young people's lives. And the last one, the language I think we had before was put equity into action, but as you may have seen, I really decided to get poetic and try to just make everything alliterate. I may get vetoed on that later, but for now, here we are. And embedding equity really is the way that we put it into action, both in our active work to identify and eliminate disparities and our system level work to try to create something that is more equitable, just, and responsive in all the systems we are a part of, and just our work to ensure that all youth can thrive in their chosen educational and career paths. So essentially, these are the 3 imperatives, and I'll kind of throw it out to everyone. Do these make sense? Do these feel like they capture our work in a broad way? The things we seek to accomplish, are there things missing, things you would change? Any other questions you have or comments? I'll actually jump back to the imperatives so you can see them on the slide, but I want to open these up for some discussion. I see Wes stepped away. Oh, and hey, Anna, I welcome your comments.
Thanks, Cord. I was waiting to see if somebody else wanted to step forward, but I'll kick us off. I think these are great. I think after the conversation that we had last time, like the sort of restructuring of how you put it on the first slide makes a ton of sense. And I think we all want to prioritize prevention and continue to focus on creating healthy communities and not just responding to negative experiences, right? We don't want to wait until it's a problem. So I don't know how you would prioritize these 3 above each other, right? Like, you can't really create a healthy community if you're not engaging with community on what healthy community looks like. And that is, in a way, embedding equity, right? Like they're supportive of each other, and I don't think like labeling them 1, 2, and 3 indicates that, at least in my mind, that 1 is more important than 3. I think they're just sort of concurrent strategies to achieve the outcomes that you're looking for. And maybe a statement to that effect in the end result would be helpful, right? But I don't see a gap here in terms of the conversation we had last time, and then how you're addressing it here. It feels like very responsive to the recommendations that were made. So no concerns from where I sit.
Amazing, thank you.
I think my only question that comes up is probably getting more into the weeds. I love the imperatives, and I would echo Anna that I don't think one over the other. They have to be all in existence for them to all be working well. And my question just comes on things like the connection, where you provide opportunities for youth to engage and re-engage, the question of like how that falls within strategies and who's going to be focusing on that work. Like the council isn't necessarily, or are they? So that's where I think how they layer into those 4 categories will certainly be important.
Wes, I saw your hand as well. Thank you, Bethany. Hey, Wes, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, everything that's been said is great. I think the only thing I think in either 2 or 3, just on a through line from the last conversation, is around youth leadership. So I think that could be parked somewhere in creating connection opportunities for youth to lead in this work, or it could be inequity. I think either one would be valid, but providing that verbiage somewhere in the imperatives, I think, would be really important.
Thanks, Wes. Yeah, shortly before this, I was sharing a draft of this with Bill, who's here at the meeting, and I did a bunch of wordsmithing, as I think he had some good feedback, and there was some language around youth voice and choice that I put here, and I pulled it back out only because it does show up when we get to the levels of impact, but it might find a way back in here. But I feel like I'm struggling with the connection piece because all this is centered around youth. But I think there's also an important piece of connection that is about our connection with other with programs, with stakeholders, with our partners. I mean, as one of our staff, we were talking about the order of these imperatives. One of my colleagues said, "I think connection needs to come first because you need connection to do the other things." And even around, for example, our work around reducing ethnic and racial disparities in the justice system, there's data that drives that work, but the relationship and the trust that we build with county juvenile departments is critical. So there's connection that is necessary for us to embed equity. There's connection that's necessary for us to do prevention work. So I'm struggling with connection being only about youth, or that being construed as only about youth. And that might need more. I think there's some wordsmithing still potentially, but I appreciate that feedback, that youth leading and having a voice feels like it could be named in the imperatives as well. Brian, I think, did you join?
I did, Cord. I'm here.
Terrific. All right, I'm gonna, let's see. I don't actually know. There we go. We've kind of talked about that. I've shared this last time we met, the work group. These levels of impact were kind of based on something that we shared with the community in our last community engagement cycle, just how our work operates at these different levels. And I thought I would share again these levels of impact. I think when the work group met previously, the way that this was structured was flipped, where these 4 levels of impact were the highest level of organization, and what are now the imperatives were sort of ambiguous in where they sat. Now the 3 imperatives are really like the 3 bodies of work, and in each of those we see work happening at these different levels. I'll pause for a second. Folks can read this, and certainly if you have feedback on these the language here and welcome it. Hey, Anna, please go ahead.
I'll just be the first every time. Wondering if you have run this by the youth that consult with you in terms of I'm thinking specifically around the centering youth and the language that's used there. I know youth voice and choice is a thing that OHA says a lot, and I think ODE says it too. Our youth council does not feel as energized by that language. So just wondering if that, I don't know how to tell you what to say that would work for them, but wondering if there would be an opportunity for them to put some words to this that would feel really meaningful to them and kind of demonstrate a commitment to that in the work.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think beyond the work group and the opportunity for youth council members to engage here, we haven't done that. The idea is to share at the larger council meeting next month to bring something forward there. But Abe is the staffer for the youth committee, so we can also think about a strategy to try to be more intentional about working with them around the language here as well. I don't know if you're going to be meeting, if that committee meets before the next council meeting, but that might.
Yeah, we're meeting next week, actually, next Friday. We can touch base and maybe we can do the agenda.
I'll make myself free if I'm not already. I think that, because I do think that's a great sort of suggestion and an oversight to avoid on my part. I'm going to slide us to, I don't actually know what comes next. Let's see. So just discussion about those levels. I'll kind of throw one more thing out there, and then I'm just going to let us zoom out and we can just discuss like what we've got here and get folks' overall impressions. But I wanted to give an example of like how this would work in practice. So this thing here, explore a model to enhance data sharing between schools and CBOs for re-engagement. That is one of, I don't know, 100 something different ideas and priorities that we've generated already as part of our first retreat to start this planning process. I mean, with that specifically, just for folks who may not be familiar with our re-engagement programs that are trying to reach young people who have left school or might be at risk of leaving high school before completing, one of the challenges that community-based organizations have is finding out when youth are being dropped from the local public high school. A district-run re-engagement program has school district data, whereas a CBO often has a hard time knowing who might be, might be in need of that outreach. So what I tried to do here was take one idea from that set of priorities and say, okay, where would this fit and how does this fit into the structure? So this would probably fit into prevention. It's really about the prevention of disconnection, about trying to be proactive in re-engaging a young person who is not attending school or who has even been dropped from enrollment. So at a program level, we might look at this as something that we're trying to do to better support our grantees who are doing re-engagement programming. So the strategy is that we want to establish this data sharing protocol for our re-engagement programs to allow them to respond and reconnect young people rapidly and not delay that effort. And then there's a set of actions here. This is sort of me just trying to kind of work through what this might look like. So the actions would be things that we would do in order to move the strategy forward. And then we would try to also identify like, what is a measurable outcome? What can we actually measure from our vantage point? And for us, working directly with CBOs, we can know how many of our grantees have an agreement with the district and have either an agreement to access data or some sort of referral process. Either they would have that at the time they apply for the grant, or we would create some sort of tools, to support them in getting this established over the course of their grant. And we would have some point in time where we'd say, okay, in the 2025-27 biennium, 50% of our re-engagement CBOs had this. And our goal in 27-29 is to have 75% of our CBOs having these agreements in place. So we know by having those agreements, they're able to know when a young person is leaving school and immediately get in contact and work to re-engage them. So this is an example of how something fits into the imperative. There's another example of, if we talk about the systems level, that's really us working with ODE. And that might be a different path of actions. Neither of these is meant to be like the right answer, but this is just a way of seeing this in practice. When we take the ideas that we have for how we move our work forward and what a strategy looks like and what the actions that make up that strategy might be. And with that, I'm actually going to pause the sharing. I don't know if we've actually put the slideshow in the chat. And I see Melissa, you sent me a message about that. Yeah, Melissa, do you mind sharing that in the chat? That would be great, because then I can take my screen share down and we can spend the rest of the time in discussion and folks can just refer to slides.
Sure. Please unmute and let me know if that link doesn't work and we'll try again. Thanks.
And I should actually probably ask / thank. I think, Anna, it was probably in a document. I think the imperatives language was something I stole either from System of Care. Maybe I stole it from ADPC. I can't remember. But I thought that was a nice phrase. So I did try to borrow effectively from some of our peers here. Maybe it was ADPC. I don't know, Wes. Maybe I found it in a totally different place. Maybe I was looking at someone else's plan. I thought
I don't remember the word imperative. I can go back and look. I focus on the strategies and goals. So
I know where I got it. It's actually Adrian, I should think, because Adrian, you were going to share something from All Hands Raised, and I ended up going on their website and finding their strategic plan, and I stole it from them. So you actually get the credit for directing me to that particular loot box.
Oh, wonderful. But I won't take the credit because they did the work.
They did it. They probably hired some really smart consultants to do it, so I just borrowed their work.
Yes.
So for folks many of you have been through a few of these conversations. It feels like from your responses, like we're keeping this aligned with the feedback we're getting. What I'm maybe trying to get by the end of this conversation is just sort of a sense of like, what other things might I sort of tweak or adjust in order to bring something to our council in a couple of weeks. To essentially, what I'd like to share with our council is a structure that then they have an opportunity. We'll probably put it out to the council a little ahead of the meeting, so probably have about a week to make final adjustments. And really just kind of do it, check in with them and say, does this feel right to you? And then we essentially start building out the content within that structure. The prioritization, where we started, I think hopefully is actually easier once we have this, because one thing that can help us prioritize is knowing where this fits into and where an action fits into the imperatives. Does it do one of those things? If not, maybe it is something else. So I'm hoping that what I bring forward is something that, the council can then sort of say, this feels good, and we can keep working towards the content of the plan, and then potentially also continuing to meet with the work group periodically during the summer on that work.
I like what's here, and I really like your examples, and they've already got me thinking. I'm like, yeah, that'd be great. Let's do that. But one of the questions is like, is your outcome is the same for both? Where, you know, I could see a expansion where once you're systems level, you really want even a broader outcome that you're looking to see. If you're working with ODE, what's their outcome that you may be able to also be addressing? And so I think that goes back to one of the long list of things that you have before you and how you prioritize. So I'm glad you brought that up. Is, you know, do you anticipate coming all of the outputs and outcomes coming from kind of the brainstorm you've already done, or will there be further work in how you see those outcomes go back, you know, full circle to, are we achieving our imperatives? Does
So I
that
think there's two things there. Yeah. So the first, I think that observation is really good. I might go and rewrite this. I think I'll keep this example when I share this out with the council. But I think an ODE level outcome would be something more along the lines of ODE communicating with districts about how they can actually proactively work with re-engagement programs who we may or may not fund, and actually like changing the way that districts and schools see their ability to partner for support around youth who are not attending or who are getting dropped. So yeah, I think that would look different. I don't know the metric there, but I think it's a good point that a system level strategy should have a system level outcome, whereas a program level strategy here has a program level outcome. That makes a ton of sense. To your second question, when I was going through the list of ideas that the council and staff and partners generate, this was one of the easier ones for me to turn into a strategy. I think about 3/4, I would really have a hard time turning it into, this is what we will do, and here's how we'll measure it, and these are the steps. And that's okay, because I mean, that is often, it's a very aspirational conversation. There was a lot of visioning, and I think that turning vision into steps is hard lots of the time. So my sense is that work is going to be challenging. There's stuff that I think is just maybe not going to make as much sense once we try to turn it into a strategy or action. And likewise, I think that as we do that work, there might be things that emerge where we're like, you know, we didn't have this on the list, but this actually feels important to note. So, I mean, I kind of feel like there's maybe an open question there about like how to turn all the things that were generated in that initial conversation into things that can be strategies and actions. And I mean, I think there's also some caution around like adding more and more and more, and like where do we sort of say, okay, we can't really add anything else right now. So maybe figuring out what the protocol is for putting more in, given that we already have a lot that will take work to translate. Let me ask a question of the folks, well, you know, really anybody who's done some strategic planning. I actually feel like maybe there's a slide, I think it's slide, it would be 8 in this deck. I mean, I've kind of got these levels that sort of made sense to me. And then as I think about like what a strategy actually is, like there's one part of me that's like, is this too many levels? And there's this also this like, is there something in between the level of impact and the more specific strategies? So for example, you know, talk about information sharing between districts and re-engagement programs. But is there a need for a level where you would bundle all of the re-engagement related program work together, just for sort of organizational purposes? Like I kind of, like I was talking to someone on our team and I was talking about how broad and long our previous plan was. And she was like, I love that the plan is as long and as detailed as it is. And I think that there's like a struggle sometimes with a plan having too much content. And also like, like you also want to be somewhat focused and try to sort of reduce the complexity as much as possible. And so I just am wondering if folks have any feedback on like, does this feel like the right level of complexity? Does it need to sort of have another layer or level? Or does it need to actually be reduced even further? Is it still like too much structure?
So far for me, what you've captured, it's clear. It's extremely clear. I know exactly what you're targeting. And then you're from the summary of what you provided as an image, you're just then from there giving more detail. And I think it helps to guide how you do and implement the work we're trying to do. So I think it actually, for me, it's the appropriate amount of content and detail. And just that it's organized and clear, it helps me. I really like how you've laid this out.
Awesome. Thank you, Adrian.
I was going to say, Cord, another thing also I think is in part of this process strategic plan is monitoring, right? So whatever we put in the plan, we kind of have to monitor. So I think that's another thing to kind of take into account. The more you have in there, the more there is to monitor, right? So that's another, I think, kind of to keep an eye on that. I do like the way it is, but that's something to also keep in mind.
And from what I heard from what you just said, Abe, is we really didn't have anything to hold from a past plan, and I may be incorrect, hold people accountable because there really wasn't anything in there to monitor. Is that correct? Cord was
It's
so I kind of like that here you can hold people accountable.
I think that most of what we measured was did the thing get done? There wasn't as much of a did the thing we got done have an impact? And do we know why we did that thing? So most like 95% of what was in the previous plan was work of the division. There were some things that the council was asked to do, but most of what we did internally was track our work as staff. We're thinking about like some different ways of doing like the project management once we actually have a plan and how we do that. We did in our regular like quarterly check-ins, we would talk about what responsibilities in the plan someone had, and it was part of our management and feedback. But I think there's some other ways we might try to approach it. So it wasn't that there wasn't any accountability, but it just was sort of like, oh, did we do the thing? Yes. If we didn't do the thing, we maybe didn't even dig too deeply into why we didn't do it. It didn't, the priority changed, or we couldn't do it, or this, there's all sorts of reasons. But I think managing that differently this time is something we want to do. So yeah, this should help us manage it better.
That's what I was thinking. From what you have, it helps with that because then you put measurements in there. But yeah.
Wes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said in terms of like as a state agency rolling things up and showing progress and holding folks accountable. I think explaining to community is a little different though. Like I'm reading this and I'm like, oh, I want to dig into this more. And then like I'm like, where does this fit? Like kind of complexity. It might behoove you to add the like classic I forget what you like the how, why, who kind of questions. That's what we do with our youth in terms of like making a plan or a decision-making tool, because I think they fit well. So like your guiding elements are your why, your imperatives are your how, like the quality and how you're going to do stuff, like the system of support around that. Then you got who is kind of the levels of impact, and then the what are the strategies and actions. Just like adding that in, because I think that's just easier to describe to people a little bit in terms of like when you approach this with a broader audience. And I think that I was actually going to say like 7, you could just fit that in, and this would be a pretty, because then it's like I see this as a linear thinker, like and that approach would be more of a horizontal thing, like I don't know what the word is for the opposite of a linear thinker. So you can kind of, they're all kind of interrelated.
No, I really like that. So what?
Yeah.
Say the 7. heard something about 7, but I don't know what you meant.
I didn't say 7. I was
Oh.
gonna say maybe I was starting 7. It's like the interrogative this is like there's like a name for it. I forget what you call it. That
Oh, but just like, yeah, but like the sort of like who, what,
yes,
how, why,
yes.
when.
I mean,
Yeah.
if you start that sentence, you're probably gonna find it on.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good observation and would be pretty easy to map onto this and would probably be really helpful. I think it's great for community, but good for us. So I'm happy you made that observation because I did not think about it that way, but it fits. Brian, I know you're at the conference right now. Are you able to jump in?
Kind of. No, I gave a thumbs up. I thought I appreciated.
Oh, sorry, I missed your thumb. Thanks.
No, I appreciated Wes's comment around, and even back to Anna's. I think to the extent that we can make our plan, and I'm not suggesting dumbing it down, but like plain, both for community and youth, and we may need different versions of the plan. I don't know. Anna knows, I think at the System of Care Advisory Council, there have been lots of conversations about, who the audience is, and we don't need to get into all the details, but I think a plan, there may be versions of the plan or elements that we need to think about how we frame it and outline it, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I like what I've heard so far, and I think we're on a good path. And I think the youth engagement piece with our committee and over the summer are definitely things that we'll want to wrestle with as we've sort of now created this, I don't know, this outline. So those are my quick thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
I was just going to jump into one of your initial questions. I don't think you need to add any levels. Like the way that it is currently because I think it's clear how they relate to one another, and adding a piece like if you referenced, re-engagement, well, that's a strategy that has multiple levels of impact, and I don't think you need to silo anymore the comprehensive work that you're doing, but try and find ways that it connects. So I wouldn't add any. I think
No, that makes sense. That's helpful.
And everything right now seems to connect really well, I think, from one to the next track in how they relate to the other pieces of work.
Got it. Thank you. Diana, are you if you're able to, I'd love to get some of your thoughts coming from you attended one of the earlier work group meetings, and what do you think of where we're at now? And if you're not able to, that's okay. With that, I see we have a few minutes left. This has been very, very helpful for me. I really appreciate the feedback and some of the I think great insights that will help us get the next version of this cooked up. I think for sure, Abe, I'd love to talk about how we could share it with the youth committee, and I feel like that framework, Wes, that you kind of talked about might be something we really want to test there to sort of like see if I think I learned that as when I was like worked for my school newspaper, but the who, what, when, where, how, why still resonates at this level. So I feel like that's pretty useful. I think maybe just give a couple more minutes if anybody else wants to share any thoughts, questions, or other input. Anna, please go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm taking up so much space today. Kind of building on what Wes's comment was, I think and I agree not adding any more levels, but on the how the priorities fit into the plan slide where you have the strategy and the action outcome. I love the like program level outcome tied to the program level work, right? How you've sort of broken it across. I think that's really helpful in terms of your thinking and our thinking as far as kind of tracking progress and accountability. One of the things that our folks have been asked, our people with lived experience have been asking us is to also identify sort of like the impact, like how will I know as a person who's trying to engage in this process that something has changed or that this work is doing something for me, right? They hear, you know, we have a lot of folks who are like, y'all talk all the time about how much money you're spending and how much planning you're doing, and like nothing has changed for me on the ground, right? So like, is there a way to sort of name in those little boxes of like, people will feel this work on the ground, or youth, something will change for youth in this way if this is working out, right? To again sort of make it more applicable to people with lived experience, but also to really build that accountability of like, maybe we've done all these things and we see X% increase in this, and if nothing's changing on the ground, we still need to know that the work hasn't really had the lived impact that we're looking for.
Yeah, thank you. That I think you mentioned that last time, and I think that now it makes more sense to me seeing it when you kind of compare it to the example, because like like in the example of like changing how information is shared, like a young person is not necessarily going to know there's a data sharing agreement, but what they might know or what their family might know is that if you don't show up to school for 5 days in a row, that someone is going to show up at your door where that might not have been happening before.
Exactly.
So like that one, there's like a tangible change that should happen in a community where we've done this. If you stop going to school, something is going to happen differently than what used to happen. And I really appreciate that. I saw Brian also sent some applause out for that. And I like kind of maybe naming both like a quantitative outcome, like the data, like what data do we have, but also this maybe qualitative experiential piece. Uh-oh, did we
I'm
lose
somewhat
Brian?
obsessed with
Oh,
that,
there you
so
go.
I'm going to keep naming it until I start seeing it in strategic plans.
No, well, I mean, hold us to it. I think that's something that we can and should do.
It would be a great completion of circle if your outcome went back to your level of impact in the ways that you see it go to youth community program and systems.
Yeah, I think is also makes it a little trickier, but I think we can do it. With that, I see we've got about 2 minutes left. I really appreciate everyone's time and the time you've spent over the past couple of months with us doing this. I think we will try to continue the work group after the next council meeting, which is, I think the last slide has the date, June 13th. Yep. So we'll probably put an email out sometime, probably right around the time of that meeting with kind of our plan for this group to continue. We'll probably try to continue to do it the same cadence of every 2 or maybe 3 weeks. I know summer gets squirrely with vacations and all the other fun stuff that happens. But we hope that those of you that have been a part of it will be able to continue, because it has been, at least for me, really, really helpful, and I really appreciate it. With that, Diana, any comments for you from you? Are you able to give us any last words or adjourn us?
No, just thank you everyone for sharing. I was taking notes. I really appreciated all the comments.
Amazing, thank you. All right, well, you can call our meeting to conclusion and then we'll stop recording.
All right, and I conclude this meeting.
Thank you. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great afternoon. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Al.